Old houses did not stay warm at night by accident. They were built by folks who understood heat as something you trapped, guided, and protected, not something you generated endlessly at the flip of a switch. Back when central heating and electric heaters just weren't around, warmth had to be earned through design, materials, daily habits, and, well, a fair bit of discipline. What looks primitive today was often far more efficient than we assume, especially overnight when heat loss is most severe. Understanding how this worked is not nostalgia, it's usable knowledge. The structure of old houses was designed to slow heat loss, not create heat. Older homes were built with the assumption that heat was scarce. Thick stone, brick, and solid timber walls were not just aesthetic choices, they were thermal storage systems. These materials absorb heat slowly during the day and release it slowly at night. This is thermal mass, and it is one of the most overlooked advantages of pre-modern construction. When a fire burned for several hours in the evening, the walls themselves became part of the heating system, radiating warmth long after the flames were gone. You can apply this today by understanding which materials in your home hold heat and which bleed it away. A concrete floor, a masonry wall, or even large water containers placed near a heat source will absorb warmth and release it over time. Lightweight drywall and hollow construction do the opposite. Old builders did not waste heat on empty air cavities. Fireplaces were not decorative, they were managed heat engines. Contrary to modern belief, fireplaces in old houses were not constantly burning all night. Fires were built hot and efficient in the evening, then banked or allowed to die down deliberately. The goal was not flame, but residual heat. Hearthstones, iron firebacks, and the surrounding masonry, they captured heat and released it slowly into the room, even well after the fire was out. Now, you might notice that many older homes also had fireplaces that were smaller than what you see in modern reproductions. Those smaller openings actually helped reduce draft loss, which meant more heat stayed put right where folks needed it most. Chimneys back then were carefully sized to pull smoke out without, pulling all the room's heat out with it. Some homes even went so far as to block the flues overnight once the embers were out, just to trap that warmth inside. In modern terms, this is all about controlled heat release. If you're using a wood stove today, running it hot earlier in the evening and then letting the stored heat do the work overnight is often way more effective than trying to keep a fire going all night long. Room size and ceiling height really worked in favor of keeping things warm at night. Old houses, they usually had smaller rooms and lower ceilings, especially where folks slept. Since heat rises, large open spaces are just a lot harder to keep warm once the fire's out. That's why bedrooms were intentionally compact, often built with thick walls and as little exterior exposure as possible. Beds were placed away from exterior walls when possible, and sometimes built into alcoves or wall recesses. These were not design quirks, they were thermal strategies. A smaller air volume means retained heat lasts longer. Applying this today can be as simple as closing off unused rooms at night, lowering effective ceiling height with fabric canopies or temporary partitions, and concentrating sleeping areas into smaller zones during cold periods. Windows were treated as controlled weaknesses, not open invitations for cold. Glass was expensive and inefficient, so old houses used it carefully. Windows were smaller, often deeply set into thick walls. Shutters, heavy curtains, and interior wooden panels were closed at night to block radiant heat loss. This layered approach created dead air pockets that acted as insulation. The key detail is timing. Windows were open during the day when sunlight could warm interior surfaces and closed tightly before dusk to trap that heat inside. This daily rhythm mattered more than the glass itself. Modern homeowners can replicate this with thermal curtains, interior shutters, or even temporary nighttime window coverings. The principle remains the same. Sunlight in, heat stays, cold stays out. Floors were insulated by habit, not technology. Cold floors drain heat from the body faster than cold air. Old houses addressed this with layered floor coverings. Rugs, rush mats, wool carpets, and even straw-filled underlayers were common. These were not luxuries, they were thermal barriers. Sleeping areas often had additional floor insulation, especially under beds. In some regions, raised wooden floors allowed cold air to circulate underneath, but this was offset by thick coverings above. Today, adding rugs or insulating under sleeping areas is one of the fastest ways to improve nighttime warmth without changing room temperature. Body heat loss through the feet is still a problem modern homes often ignore. Old beds were designed to trap warmth. Heavy wooden frames reduced airflow underneath. Mattresses were filled with straw, wool, or feathers, all excellent insulators. Thick blankets and layered coverings trapped body heat efficiently. People slept closer together not just for comfort but for warmth. Bed curtains or box beds enclosed the sleeping space, creating a microclimate that stayed warm throughout the night. A modern equivalent is reducing the volume of air your body has to heat. Insulated bedding, layered blankets, and even tent-like sleep enclosures in cold environments replicate what old houses did naturally. Old households prepared for nightfall intentionally. Fires were stoked in the late afternoon, meals were cooked when heat output was highest, and heavy tasks were done before sunset. Doors were sealed early. Wet clothing was dried near the hearth before night. People understood that once the sun was gone, heat was a finite resource. Nothing was wasted. This mindset alone made a significant difference. Applying this today means, well, aligning heat use with retention. Heat your space earlier, seal it well, and rely on stored warmth overnight instead of continuous heating. Night clothing was not an afterthought. Wool nightcaps, socks, and layered garments reduced heat loss during sleep. Head and feet coverage mattered because that's where heat escapes fastest. Modern heating has made people rely on ambient temperature rather than personal insulation. Old houses stayed warm because people dressed appropriately for indoor cold, reducing the need for constant heat generation. This is still relevant. Insulating the body is often more efficient than heating the room. The combination of all these factors really mattered more than any single method. No single trick kept old houses warm at night. It was the system, plain and simple. Thick walls, controlled fires, small rooms, layered windows, insulated floors, enclosed beds, disciplined routines, and appropriate clothing all worked together, making a real difference. Remove one element and the system weakens. Use them together, and warmth lasts far longer than expected. This is the real lesson for preppers and historians alike. Warmth was managed, not produced on demand. Power outages, fuel shortages, and rising energy costs make this information practical, not academic. Understanding how heat behaves allows you to stay warm with less input. Old houses were not inefficient. They were optimized for scarcity. If you apply even half of these principles, you reduce dependence on modern systems and gain resilience. That is why this knowledge survived for centuries. If this breakdown added value to your understanding of historical living and practical survival, subscribe to Warfield Prepper Chronicles for more deep dives like this. Share this with anyone who thinks old houses were colder just because they lacked modern technology. There is more wisdom in the past than most people are willing to admit.